I woke up that day with the feeling that reality had cracked at the seams, and you know the scariest part? I was right. I got a call at 4 a.m. ship time and was told that the universe as we'd known it for the last 3,000 years had just changed forever. At the time, I was serving as an energy anomaly analyst at Nexus Prime Station, the most boring job in the galaxy, where usually nothing more interesting happened than a coffee machine malfunctioning. But that night, our scanners picked up something impossible, an energy signature that didn't match any of the 5 known types. My hand was shaking as I looked at the screen because the numbers showed power capable of tearing a star in half like an orange. I thought the equipment had broken, but then I saw the source coordinates, the dying neutron star Omicron 7, and I realized we were all in big trouble. You see, there was an unwritten law in the universe that had kept the peace between races for over a millennium. Each civilization possessed its own type of energy, and only that one. We humans took pride in our 0 point, the ability to pull energy from the very vacuum of space, creating something out of absolute nothingness. The Cretans, with their strange silvery ships, swam in streams of dark matter. They saw what was invisible to everyone else, conducting the mass of the universe like maestros, leading an invisible orchestra. The Solarians were the direct opposite, fiery fanatics drawing power from the plasma storms of stars. Their ships looked like shards of suns. The Void Raiders terrified everyone with their annihilation engines, where matter met antimatter in a deadly dance of mutual destruction. And the Archons, those arrogant bastards, thought they were above everyone because they had learned to create and control black holes the size of an apple. The balance was fragile, but it worked because no one had an absolute advantage. And now our scanners were screaming about the existence of a 6th source that broke all the rules of the game. The Omicron fire, as scientists later dubbed it, wasn't just more powerful than the other energies. It was qualitatively different, as if someone had taken all 5 known types, stirred them in a cauldron of madness, and added something completely alien even to us starfarers. Initial calculations showed that 1 gram of this substance contained enough energy to incinerate an entire planetary system, or, even more terrifying, to resurrect a dead star from the ashes. I remember sitting in my cramped cabin at that moment, staring at the holographic model of Omicron 7, that small dead star pulsing with impossible light, and feeling a chill spread down my spine. Because I realized a simple truth. When a joker enters the game, all previous rules go into the cosmic abyss. A week later, the Council of 5 Races was set to meet for an emergency session to decide the fate of this discovery, and I somehow knew that this meeting would be the last peaceful event in our history. The thing is, the problem with absolute power isn't that it's hard to get, it's that it's impossible to hold without using it. And the Omicron fire was exactly that. Absolute power over the stars, time, and the very fabric of reality. The Archons demanded it be handed over to them, arguing that only they were wise enough to manage such force. The Solarians wanted to use it to ignite new suns in dead sectors of the galaxy. The Cretans muttered about ancient prophecies and a 7th power that would either unite or destroy all races. The Void Raiders remained silent. But I saw their fleets gathering on the borders of the neutral zone like packs of hungry wolves. And we humans did what we did best, tried to make everyone play nice, knowing full well it was useless. I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight, analyzing the data, and with every hour I became more convinced that we hadn't just found a new energy source. We had found the trigger for a galactic war that would burn everything living within 1,000 light years, leaving behind nothing but ash and the quantum shadows of fallen civilizations. I was standing in the main hall of the conquered Nexus station when everything went to hell, and I had exactly 47 seconds to realize I had just witnessed the impossible. The ceremony was supposed to be a historic event, the 5 races gathering together for the first time in 3 centuries to peacefully decide the fate of the Omicron fire, that cursed energy for which half the galaxy was ready to tear each other's throats out. I wasn't there as an honored guest, but as Captain Detective Marcus Vane, an energy trace specialist, a man who could identify a type of energy by its residual radiation as easily as you distinguish coffee from tea. I had been assigned to guard the vault, where a sample of the Omicron fire the size of a grain of sand sat in a special warped space-time container, enough to wipe a small star off the face of the universe. The hall was packed, diplomats in ceremonial robes, security from all 5 races, scanners on every square meter, and energy shields capable of withstanding an antimatter blast. It seemed a fly couldn't pass unnoticed. Then hell broke loose, and it was so fast and ruthless that my brain could barely register what was happening. First, all the lights went out. But it wasn't a normal power failure. The energy itself vanished from the room as if someone had sucked it out with a giant vacuum, and I recognized the signature of 0 point, only working in reverse. Then, the space around the vault began to warp with waves of dark matter, visible only in the infrared spectrum of my implants. Creton technology. Next, the temperature in the center of the hall spiked to the temperature of a star's surface for a fraction of a second. Solarian plasma resonance burned through the protective fields like paper. The guards didn't even have time to scream when they were hit by what's called a rainbow discharge, a combination of all 5 energies simultaneously, which was absolutely impossible by all known laws of physics because these energies are mutually exclusive. I saw bodies turn not into ash, not into dust, but into quantum shadows, translucent imprints frozen in the last moment of life, like ghosts burned onto the retina of reality. When the systems rebooted 47 seconds later and the light returned, the vault was a gaping hole, and I stood in the middle of a nightmare trying to grasp the scale of the catastrophe. The container was intact, but the Omicron fire was gone, evaporated as if it had never existed, and that was even stranger because even teleportation leaves an energy trail. Yet here, there was absolute nothingness. I rushed to the security console, my hands shaking as I pulled up the logs from all the scanners, and what I saw made my stomach tie in a knot. The thieves didn't leave through normal space, hyperspace, subspace tunnels, or quantum shifts. They stepped into a blind spot between dimensions, an area that theoretically existed in equations but was considered unreachable by any known technology. The scanners only caught the moment of entry and exit, but the transition itself was invisible, as if someone had cut out a piece of reality and replaced it with a void. I triple-checked the data, hoping for an equipment error, but the numbers didn't lie. It was a 6th technology, a 6th race that none of the 5 great civilizations even knew existed. What followed was what I call a moment of collective madness, where politics, panic, and paranoia blended into a toxic cocktail. Representatives of all races accused each other of conspiracy, screaming about betrayal and secret plots, waving energy weapons right there in the hall, turning a diplomatic meeting into a powder keg with a burning fuse. The Archons claimed only humans could have organized such a complex operation. The Solarians suspected the Void Raiders of using a secret antimatter weapon. The Cretans muttered about an ancient prophecy and a ghost race living between worlds. And I stood over the quantum shadows of the dead guards, looking at their terror-frozen faces, and I knew one thing. Whoever did this had just started a war that could destroy the galaxy. Because the Omicron fire in the hands of an unknown race that mastered all 5 energies at once meant the end of the balance of power, the end of the fragile peace, the end of everything we had built for millennia. And the scariest part, I realized my job had changed. I was no longer just a detective analyzing energy traces in a lab. I had become a hunter, tasked with tracking down ghosts capable of walking between worlds and stealing the power of gods. The message arrived 3 days after the theft, when I hadn't slept for 2 days straight while analyzing every byte of data from the crime scene, and it appeared on my personal terminal in a way that should have been impossible. No signs of a hack, no digital footprints. The text just materialized on the screen as if written in ink on water. They will return for the stars, seek the shards of the firsts. I stared at those words, feeling goosebumps run down my spine because the terminal was protected by military-grade encryption. Only 3 people in the entire galaxy had access, and I was one of them. The anonymous sender knew not only about the theft, but about something more. Some ancient history regarding the shards of the firsts, a term I'd only heard in half-forgotten Cretan legends about a creator race that existed millions of years ago. I tried to trace the source of the message, ran it through every known analysis protocol, but the result was the same. The message came from nowhere and nothing simultaneously, from that very blind spot between dimensions where the thieves had vanished. In that moment, I realized 2 things. First, someone wanted me to find the kidnappers, and second, the official hunting fleets of the 5 races, which were already forming with loud fanfare, were doomed to fail. You see, the problem with hunting ghosts is that you need a team capable of seeing the unseen, and no official military structure was fit for the task. Each race was assembling its best ships, its elite warriors, but they were all limited to one type of energy, one way of thinking, one paradigm of reality. But the thieves used all 5 energies at once. They played by rules we didn't even know, and to catch them, I didn't need soldiers. I needed madmen, outcasts, those who had already crossed the boundaries of the possible and survived. The first one I found was Shasa, a Cretan prophetess whom her own people had declared insane after she spent 3 months in a pure stream of dark matter, and returned with eyes the color of the void, able to see future energy currents, a second before they manifested. Then there was Ignis, a Solarian kamikaze pilot who, in a fit of religious ecstasy, dove into the corona of a star in his fighter, stayed there for 20 minutes instead of the lethal 10 seconds, and emerged with skin glowing from within with plasma fire. Exiled for heresy, but possessing plasma resonance at a level unreachable by ordinary Solarians. Morgan was the third, and finding the Void Raider, whose ship ran on an experimental total annihilation engine, turned out to be easier than I thought because she found me herself. She appeared in my cabin in the middle of the night, materializing from the shadows with a predator's grin and an offer I couldn't refuse. Her people had exiled her after she destroyed an entire pirate base, accidentally erasing 3 moons and a trading station along with it, but her knowledge of antimatter and annihilation was unsurpassed. The last was Gravitex, an Archon heretic whom I pulled from a prison pod on the edge of controlled space, where he was serving a life sentence for creating a fist-sized artificial black hole that nearly swallowed a research station. He was a mad genius of gravitational singularities, capable of feeling the warp of space-time with the tips of his metallic tentacles. And when I offered him freedom in exchange for help with the hunt, he laughed with a sound like the grinding of a dying universe and agreed. I had assembled a team of outcasts, each a master of their own energy, each having crossed the line that normal members of their races were afraid to even glance at, and I knew this was our only chance. The ship was the experimental human cruiser Prometheus Rising, the brainchild of mad engineers from our military program who tried to create a vessel capable of utilizing not one, but all the energies of the galaxy. At the heart of the ship beat a multispectral core, a device the size of a small room where layers of reality were sliced so thin and interwoven that they could theoretically switch between energy types in nanoseconds. In practice, every switch carried the risk of tearing the ship into quantum particles, which is why the Prometheus was considered too dangerous for use and had been gathering dust in a secret shipyard for the last 5 years. But for our hunt for ghosts who mastered all energies, it was perfect. A mad ship for a mad crew pursuing an impossible goal. When we first gathered on the bridge, 5 outcasts from 5 warring races, I looked at their faces, at Shasa's empty eyes seeing through time, at Ignis's glowing skin pulsing with internal flame, at Morrigan's predatory smirk, at Gravitex's metallic tentacles warping the space around him. And I realized that we would either save the galaxy or destroy it faster than the thieves would. And frankly, the odds were about 50-50. The message arrived 3 days after the theft, when I hadn't slept for 2 days straight while analyzing every byte of data from the crime scene, and it appeared on my personal terminal in a way that should have been impossible. No signs of a hack, no digital footprints. The text just materialized on the screen as if written in ink on water. They will return for the stars, seek the shards of the firsts. I stared at those words, feeling goosebumps run down my spine because the terminal was protected by military-grade encryption. Only 3 people in the entire galaxy had access, and I was one of them. The anonymous sender knew not only about the theft, but about something more, some ancient history regarding the shards of the firsts, a term I'd only heard in half-forgotten Cretan legends about a creator race that existed millions of years ago. I tried to trace the source of the message, ran it through every known analysis protocol, but the result was the same. The message came from nowhere and nothing simultaneously, from that very blind spot between dimensions where the thieves had vanished. In that moment, I realized 2 things. First, someone wanted me to find the kidnappers, and second, the official hunting fleets of the 5 races, which were already forming with loud fanfare, were doomed to fail. You see, the problem with hunting ghosts is that you need a team capable of seeing the unseen, and no official military structure was fit for the task. Each race was assembling its best ships, its elite warriors, but they were all limited to one type of energy, one way of thinking, one paradigm of reality. But the thieves used all 5 energies at once. They played by rules we didn't even know, and to catch them, I didn't need soldiers. I needed madmen, outcasts, those who had already crossed the boundaries of the possible and survived. The first one I found was Shasa, a Cretan prophetess whom her own people had declared insane after she spent 3 months in a pure stream of dark matter and returned with eyes the color of the void, able to see future energy currents a second before they manifested. Then there was Ignis, a Solarian kamikaze pilot who, in a fit of religious ecstasy, dove into the corona of a star in his fighter, stayed there for 20 minutes instead of the lethal 10 seconds, and emerged with skin glowing from within with plasma fire, exiled for heresy, but possessing plasma resonance at a level unreachable by ordinary Solarians. Morgan was the third, and finding the Void Raider, whose ship ran on an experimental total annihilation engine, turned out to be easier than I thought because she found me herself. She appeared in my cabin in the middle of the night, materializing from the shadows with a predator's grin and an offer I couldn't refuse. Her people had exiled her after she destroyed an entire pirate base, accidentally erasing 3 moons and a trading station along with it, but her knowledge of antimatter and annihilation was unsurpassed. The last was Gravitex, an Archon heretic whom I pulled from a prison pod on the edge of controlled space, where he was serving a life sentence for creating a fist-sized artificial black hole that nearly swallowed a research station. He was a mad genius of gravitational singularities, capable of feeling the warp of space-time with the tips of his metallic tentacles. And when I offered him freedom in exchange for help with the hunt, he laughed with a sound like the grinding of a dying universe and agreed. I had assembled a team of outcasts, each a master of their own energy, each having crossed the line that normal members of their races were afraid to even glance at, and I knew this was our only chance. The ship was the experimental human cruiser Prometheus Rising, the brainchild of mad engineers from our military program who tried to create a vessel capable of utilizing not one, but all the energies of the galaxy. At the heart of the ship beat a multispectral core, a device the size of a small room where layers of reality were sliced so thin and interwoven that they could theoretically switch between energy types in nanoseconds. In practice, every switch carried the risk of tearing the ship into quantum particles, which is why the Prometheus was considered too dangerous for use and had been gathering dust in a secret shipyard for the last 5 years. But for our hunt for ghosts who mastered all energies, it was perfect. A mad ship for a mad crew pursuing an impossible goal. When we first gathered on the bridge, 5 outcasts from 5 warring races, I looked at their faces, at Shassa's empty eyes seeing through time, at Ignis's glowing skin pulsing with internal flame, at Morrigan's predatory smirk, at Gravitex's metallic tentacles warping the space around him. And I realized that we would either save the galaxy or destroy it faster than the thieves would. And frankly, the odds were about 50-50. The Thieves' Trail led us to Typhon Prime, a gas giant at the edge of inhabited space, surrounded by a magnetosphere of such monstrous power that our instruments began to go haywire while we were still on approach, 2 million kilometers from the planet. I sat in the captain's chair of the Prometheus, staring at the holographic projection of this monster. The planet was 30 times larger than Jupiter. Its atmosphere raged with storms the size of entire star systems, and the magnetic belts around it pulsed with rainbow flashes capable of frying the electronics of any ship in seconds. Shasa stood nearby, her empty eyes looking through reality, and she whispered that she saw the thieves' energy traces woven into the planet's magnetic lines, as if someone were using the magnetosphere itself as a giant cloaking system. We weren't alone. My scanners picked up the arrival of 3 massive fleets almost simultaneously, exiting hyperspace with the roar of tearing reality. A human armada of 200 cruisers glowing with the blue radiance of zero-point engines. Cretan ghost ships, barely visible to the eye as they warped the space around them. And a Solarian fleet where every ship looked like a shard of a living star, pulsing with plasma fire. I realized a catastrophe was beginning a second before the first torpedo erupted in a violet explosion in the middle of the magnetic belt, and then the entire cosmos around Typhon turned into hell. The Solarians attacked first, deciding the human fleet was trying to claim the Omicron fire for itself. Their plasma projectiles pierced space with beams 1,000,000 degrees hot, and wherever they touched the planet's magnetic lines, they triggered cascading chain reactions that turned ships' protective shields into glowing dust. The Cretans responded with their signature move, releasing waves of condensed dark matter that warped projectile trajectories and created gravitational traps where enemy ships crumpled like tin cans under an invisible press, their hulls folding into themselves in impossible geometric shapes. Humans deployed zero-point torpedoes, weapons that literally erased matter from reality by creating holes in space. And I saw entire sections of Solarian ships simply vanish, leaving behind an absolute void from which even light did not return. The battle raged in orbits within the magnetic belts, where the laws of physics were distorted to the limit, where explosions created time loops and spatial anomalies, and where fallen ships left behind ghostly imprints, repeating their final seconds of existence over and over again. I piloted the Prometheus through this chaos, using the multispectral core to its limit, switching between energies every few seconds to avoid destruction. 0 Point allowed us to slip through the Cretans' gravitational traps, dissolving their dark matter in quantum foam. Plasma resonance provided shields capable of withstanding direct hits from Solarian torpedoes, turning lethal energy into a harmless glow. Ignis operated the weapon systems with mad precision, his hands dancing over the consoles, every shot a work of art burning holes through the enemy formation. Morrigan engaged the annihilation engine at quarter power, and the Prometheus accelerated so fast that we left a trail of decaying matter behind us, slipping between the 2 fleets before they could even react. Gravitex created micro-singularities around us, tiny black holes that deflected enemy fire by warping projectile paths into impossible spirals. We fought our way to the upper layers of Typhon's atmosphere, where the large fleets dared not venture due to the magnetic storms, and Shasa directed me to coordinates she saw in the dark matter streams, where the Thieves' Trail was brightest, like a neon signature on the wall of the universe. We found the beacon in clouds of methane and ammonia at a depth of 200 kilometers beneath a storm that could rip a dreadnought in half with a single gust. It was a black crystal the size of a human head, pulsing with the light of all 6 known energies simultaneously. And when I took it in my hands while wearing a protective exoskeleton, my consciousness exploded with a flood of information. Coordinates for the next point burned themselves into my memory. But along with them came a message written not in words, but in pure meaning, carving straight into the brain. We did not steal, we reclaimed our own. At that moment, the atmosphere around us began to glow, matter folded into impossible shapes, and I saw them for the first time, the Echo Weavers, the 6th race, beings of pure energy and information with no permanent form. They materialized as waves of light and shadow, taking the shapes of humanoids, monsters, or geometric figures existing in too many dimensions at once. Their voices sounded not in the ears, but directly in the mind, like echoes of forgotten thoughts, and they said that the Omicron fire had always belonged to them, that the 5 races were merely children playing with fire, not understanding what they had found. Then they vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, dissolving into the magnetic storm, and I was left standing with the beacon in my hands, realizing that the hunt had only just begun, and the rules of the game were nothing like I had imagined. Gravitex spent 3 days straight without looking away from the data decryption from the beacon. His metallic tentacles were plugged directly into the ship's computer, and I saw his whole body trembling as if an electric current of increasing power was being passed through him. I visited his lab every few hours, bringing energy batteries that he consumed without a word. His consciousness was somewhere far away, in streams of ancient data encoded in ways that modern science considered impossible. On the 3rd day, he pulled away from the console, his huge eyes capable of seeing the warp of space-time, bloodshot with something resembling terror. And he called the entire crew to the bridge, saying, "We needed to hear this together because after this revelation, we would never be the same." I gathered Shasa, Ignis, and Morrigan. We stood around the holographic projector, and when Gravitex activated it, a history materialized in the air before us that turned our entire understanding of the universe upside down. 1,000,000 years ago, when our races were still crawling in the prehistoric mud of their home planets, there existed a 7th race, the Omicronians, a civilization so ancient and powerful that they didn't just study the laws of physics, they created them, rewriting reality like a programmer rewrites code. The hologram showed their cities floating between dimensions, ships the size of planets sailing through the fabric of space-time, and I watched with awestruck fear, realizing that we, the 5 great races, with all our achievements, were no more than ants to them. Gravitex spoke in a trembling voice, explaining that the Omicronians had created all 6 types of energy artificially, each as a tool to manipulate different aspects of reality. 0 point for controlling the quantum vacuum, dark matter for warping space, plasma resonance for controlling matter in extreme states, antimatter for annihilation and the release of pure energy, and gravitational singularities for managing time and space. But the crown of their creation was the Omicron fire, the 6th source, which didn't just provide energy. It allowed for the local rewriting of the laws of physics, turning the impossible into reality, materializing thoughts, and changing universal constants within a limited area. When the younger races began to reach space, the Omicronians chose the 5 most promising civilizations and gave each one a single energy source as a gift. As a teacher gives students tools, hoping they would learn wisdom through the mastery of power. But they kept the Omicron fire for themselves, knowing this power was too dangerous for immature minds. The story then turned into a tragedy of cosmic proportions, and I listened as a chill spread through my veins. The Omicronians could not resist the temptation of their own creation. They began experiments to transcend reality, attempts to become beings beyond matter and energy, pure consciousness capable of existing outside the laws of the universe. They built the Genesis accelerator in the heart of the galaxy, at the first sun, the oldest star, born at the dawn of time, and activated it with the Omicron fire as a power source. The hologram showed what happened next, a flash of light that was supposed to ascend their race to a new level of existence, but instead, it tore the fabric of their reality apart. 99% of the Omicronians transformed into what we now knew as the Echo Weavers, beings of pure energy and information, but stripped of what made them alive. Their souls and essence were burned away by the transformation process, leaving only hungry husks, parasites capable of taking any form but unable to create anything of their own, feeding on the energy of other races like vampires feed on blood. The remaining 1%, those who foresaw the catastrophe and refused the transformation, sealed the Omicron fire and the Genesis accelerator, then vanished, leaving behind only warnings in the archives and the hope that the younger races would prove wiser. When the hologram faded, a deathly silence hung over the bridge, broken only by the hum of the Prometheus's engines, and I saw the reflection of my own shock on the crew's faces. The Echo Weavers didn't steal the fire for conquest or destruction. They wanted to run the Genesis accelerator again, hoping a second attempt would restore their lost humanity and resurrect what had been burned away 1,000,000 years ago. But Gravitex warned that reactivating the device was far more likely to destroy not just the Echo Weavers, but half the galaxy, creating a cascading collapse of reality, a wave of altered physical laws that would turn star systems into a chaotic soup of impossible matter and energy. At that moment, Shasa groaned, her empty eyes flashing with dark matter light, and she received a vision of such clarity that even I felt the echo of her perception. The Echo Weavers were already on their way to the first sun, the ancient star at the galaxy's center where, among layers of exotic matter and warped space-time, the Omicronian Genesis accelerator lay dormant, awaiting its awakening. We had, perhaps, 2 weeks to cross half the galaxy, fight through the most dangerous regions of known space, and stop a race of immortal energy beings from launching a machine capable of rewriting reality. I realized we had practically no chance of success, but the alternative was watching everything we love burn. When we exited hyperspace on the outskirts of the galactic center, I regretted for the first time in my life that I had eyes capable of seeing this sight. Before us stretched the supermassive black hole Sagittarius A Cen, a monster with the mass of 4 million suns, surrounded by an accretion disk of incandescent matter that shone brighter than 1 trillion stars combined. Around it, the unified fleet of the 5 races had gathered, 10,000 ships, the largest armada in the entire recorded history of the galaxy, so massive that its energy signatures created their own gravitational distortions. Human dreadnoughts, glowing with the blue radiance of zero-point engines, lined up in battle formations alongside Cretan ghost ships, barely visible in the folds of space. Solarian battleships pulsed with plasma fire, like the hearts of dying stars. Void Raider cruisers left trails of annihilation behind them, and Archon dreadnoughts warped space-time around themselves with micro-singularities. I looked at this concentration of military might and realized that even this might not be enough, because we were about to fight not in ordinary space, but in a place where reality itself was distorted to the limit, where the laws of physics worked according to rules written by a mad god. The battle began when the Echo Weavers materialized their fleet directly within the accretion disk, and what I saw made my blood run cold. They created ships not from matter, but from memories, ghosts of fallen civilizations pulled from the quantum foam of the past. I saw the outlines of vessels that had vanished thousands of years ago in forgotten wars. Their forms flickered between reality and illusion, and they attacked with the fury of the dead, longing for revenge on the living. The accretion disk turned into a hell where time flowed non-linearly. I saw ships exploding a second before the projectiles hit them because relativistic effects near the black hole smeared causality across the timeline. Gravity tore battleships in half with tidal forces, stretching their metal like rubber. Crews died without even understanding what was happening, their screams cut short in a vacuum faster than the speed of light. Relativistic jets erupting from the black hole's poles incinerated entire fleets in fractions of a second, turning hundreds of ships into clouds of ionized plasma glowing with every color of the spectrum simultaneously. I saw a human dreadnought get caught in a gravitational anomaly and live through 1,000,000 years in 5 seconds. Its hull became covered in layers of corrosion, rust, and cosmic dust before crumbling into powder. We held on the brink of madness, the Prometheus dancing between deaths, the multispectral core switching between energies so fast the ship glowed with a rainbow halo. And then it hit me, a mad, suicidal idea that would either save us all or kill us instantly. I ordered Gravitex to tune all energy systems to a single frequency, to link zero point with dark matter, interweave plasma resonance with antimatter, and synchronize gravitational singularities with everything else into a single flow. The crew looked at me like I was insane because, by all known laws, this should have torn the ship into quantum particles, but I had seen a hint in the beacon data, a clue. The Omicronians created the seventh energy exactly like this, through a synthesis of all 6. If we could replicate their process for even a second, we could turn the Prometheus into something like their ships. I gave the command, and the multispectral core wailed like a dying universe. The temperature on the bridge jumped to 50 degrees, consoles began to melt. But then, something incredible happened. All 6 energies merged into a single stream of golden light, the 7th energy, and the Prometheus was transformed. Its hull shone so brightly it eclipsed the nearest stars. A shield of pure, rewritten reality formed around us, where the laws of physics obeyed our will. With the 7th energy, we became like gods for those precious minutes before the core burned itself out. I piloted the Prometheus through the very heart of the battle, through relativistic jets that could not touch us because we had locally rewritten the law of conservation of energy, through gravitational anomalies that warped around us, obeying our will rather than the black holes. The Echo Weaver's ghost ships dissolved upon contact with our shield. Their materialized memories could not withstand contact with a reality rewritten by a superior energy. We broke through their line of defense, leaving a trail of destroyed phantom ships behind us, but the price was monstrous. I saw on the tactical screens the Allied fleet perishing, 5,000 ships out of 10 turning into wreckage and plasma, as entire races lost their best warriors in the meat grinder at the edge of eternity. Ignis wept at his post, seeing the Solarian battleships burn, his brothers and sisters dying in plasma fire. Morrigan silently watched the destruction of the Void Raider cruisers, her face a mask of stone. But we couldn't stop because ahead, through the veil of distorted space, I saw it. The first sun, a star the size of an entire dwarf galaxy, surrounded by layers of exotic matter, pulsing with light of all possible and impossible colors, the oldest luminary of the universe, where among the folds of warped reality, the Genesis accelerator and the final battle for the fate of the galaxy awaited us. The tunnel into the first sun turned out to be a corridor of stabilized plasma, an ancient Omicronian construct that held a temperature of 1,000,000 degrees within perfect geometric boundaries, as if someone had frozen a star's fire into the shape of a tunnel. I piloted what was left of the Prometheus. The 7th energy had burned out half the ship's systems. We were flying practically on inertia, controlling the maneuvering thrusters manually, like in the ancient days of spaceflight. The tunnel walls pulsed with orange and red light, plasma flowed around us in living streams, and I felt the ship's hull vibrating from the proximity of such monstrous energy. Shasa stood beside me, her empty eyes closed. She led us through the currents of dark matter, seeing a path where the instruments showed only chaos. We flew for 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, plunging deeper and deeper into the heart of the universe's oldest star. And when the tunnel finally ended, we emerged into a space that shouldn't have existed. A hollow sphere inside the first sun, protected from the plasma by invisible force fields of such power that my scanners couldn't even measure their energy signature. They simply showed infinity. Inside the sphere lay the world city of the Omicronians, a sight so majestic and eerie at the same time that it took my breath away. Buildings hundreds of kilometers high, constructed from materials I couldn't even classify, shimmered with every color of the spectrum and those for which we had no names. Streets wide as continents spiraled toward the sky, where instead of clouds, islands of crystallized space-time floated. Transport systems frozen in motion, ships hanging in the air like insects in amber, fountains of solidified, materialized thought. All of this was stopped at the last moment before the catastrophe 1,000,000 years ago. Time did not flow here. It was frozen by some technology so advanced that even Gravitex couldn't grasp its principle. I landed the crew on one of the central plazas. We walked among statues of Omicronians, beings of humanoid form, but with features so refined they seemed the embodiment of perfection, their faces frozen masks of terror, sorrow, and despair. Some reached their hands toward the sky as if trying to stop something inevitable. Others embraced each other in a final goodbye, and I realized these weren't statues. These were the Omicronians themselves, the 1% of the race that had refused the transformation and was frozen at the moment of the cataclysm. The holograms activated as we approached the central building, a massive pyramid of black crystal pulsing with residual energy. A history of the Omicronians' final days unfolded before me in three-dimensional projections so realistic that I felt the emotions of long-dead beings as if they were my own. I saw their debates in council chambers, where thousands of the race's greatest minds argued over the fate of the Genesis accelerator. A minority warned that transformation into pure energy consciousness was not evolution, but suicide. That they would lose everything that made them alive, the ability to feel, to love, to create, to dream. But the majority was intoxicated by the prospect of immortality, the chance to become beings beyond matter, capable of seeing all dimensions at once and traveling through time as we travel through space. I heard their arguments, the passion in their voices, the certainty of their convictions. And I realized they were not fools or madmen. They were geniuses who had reached the pinnacle of the possible and craved the impossible. They were us, only 1,000,000 years more advanced, and that made their tragedy all the more terrifying. The hologram showed the moment of activation, and I could hardly watch what happened next. The Genesis accelerator, a device the size of a small moon, pulsed with the Omicron fire, and a wave of transformation swept through the city at the speed of light. The 99% of Omicronians who chose evolution dissolved into streams of pure energy, their bodies vanishing into glowing forms, and for a second, they truly became gods, beings of pure consciousness capable of seeing and understanding everything. But then, their screams began to echo in my head through the hologram. Screams not of pain, but something much worse. Screams of the realization of what they had lost. They had become immortal, all-knowing and all-powerful, but absolutely empty inside, unable to feel joy or sorrow, love or hate. Their minds were perfect calculating machines, but no longer alive. The remaining 1%, seeing this catastrophe, sealed the Omicron fire and the Genesis accelerator, freezing time around the city as a warning to future generations, and then chose death, preferring to vanish rather than exist in a world where their race had turned into parasites. We reached the central chamber, and I saw it. The Genesis accelerator, a giant ring of impossible matter with the Omicron fire pulsing inside, surrounded by echo weavers in their shifting forms, desperately trying to activate the machine again, hoping to reclaim what was irrevocably lost 1,000,000 years ago. He materialized before us from a stream of pure light, taking a form that was simultaneously Omicronian and something more. His outlines flickered between reality and illusion, and when he spoke, his voice sounded not in our ears, but directly in each of our minds. He called himself the last Omicronian, the leader of the echo weavers, and there was such ancient pain in his words that even I, having seen so much death in this war, felt a sting of compassion. He told us that for 1,000,000 years they had existed as ghosts, immortal but dead inside, able to see all the beauty of the universe but unable to feel it, knowing love only as a concept but never experiencing it. The Genesis accelerator was their only hope for redemption, a chance to complete the transformation correctly and fix the mistake made by their ancestors in a moment of pride and blindness. Then he offered us a deal that made my mind split under the weight of temptation. Let them activate the accelerator, and they would share power over reality with our races, giving us the key to rewriting the laws of physics, to immortality, and to godlike power. Refuse, he said, and they would be forced to destroy the galaxy, draining the energy from billions of stars to get enough power for activation, because they had nothing left but this desperate hope. I saw temptation pierce every member of my team, their eyes lighting up with the possibilities unfolding before them. Ignis stepped forward, his glowing skin pulsing brighter than usual, and the last Omicronian showed him a vision. His home solar cluster, the dying stars his people had abandoned generations ago, suddenly flaring with new light, resurrected by the Omicron fire, with billions of Solarians returning home to paradise worlds where plasma flowed like rivers through city streets. Morgan froze, her usual predatory smirk replaced by an expression of such longing that it hurt to look at her. And I saw her vision, her home planet, erased from the universe in an ancient war, rising from nothingness. Her people, turned to dust by antimatter, returning to life. Children playing again on streets that had existed only in her memory. Gravitex trembled, his tentacles writhing in the ecstasy of discovery. Before him opened the secrets of singularities, a total understanding of the structure of space-time, the ability to create and control black holes, not as crude tools, but as an artist controls a brush, the power to create new universes within warped space. Shasa's empty eyes suddenly filled with the light of all possible futures at once. Absolute omniscience, the ability to see every thread of fate, every decision and its consequences until the end of time, becoming a true prophetess whose words shape reality. I stood and watched these visions, feeling my own temptation clawing at the back of my mind, the chance to save everyone I'd lost, to bring back those killed during the war, to rewrite the past so the tragedies never happened. But then, I remembered the faces of the frozen Omicronians, their terror in the final moment when they realized what those who chose transformation would lose. I thought about the price of becoming a god, that the Omicron fire demanded not just energy, but the very essence of what makes us alive. Our limitations, our mortality, our ability to make mistakes and learn from them. I realized the echo weavers weren't offering us a gift, but a curse wrapped in golden promises. That reactivating the accelerator would far more likely turn us into empty ghosts like them than fix their condition. So I proposed a third path, the words tearing from my throat before I could even think them through. To destroy both the Omicron fire and the Genesis accelerator, forever closing the path to this false divinity for all races, and accepting our limitations as part of what makes us who we are. The last Omicronian froze, his form flickering, and I saw in his energy silhouette something like understanding mixed with boundless despair. The team had to vote, and I saw the internal struggle on every face, tearing them between desire and wisdom. Shasa voted first, her voice quiet but firm. Destroy it. Because she saw the future where we became gods, and in that future there was nothing living, only perfect calculating machines in hushed shells of energy. Ignis took a long time to vote, his hands shaking and tears evaporating on his scorched skin, but in the end, he chose destruction, saying his people would rather die under fading stars while remaining alive than exist forever, but empty. Morgan and Gravitex voted to preserve it, their voices sounding like a death sentence to my decision. Morgan screamed that I was robbing her of the only chance to get back everything she lost, and Gravitex muttered about the betrayal of science and knowledge. 3 against 2, the decision was made, and I saw something break in my comrades. But then, after a minute of silence, Morgan straightened up and nodded, saying that true strength isn't in getting everything you want, but in accepting its impossibility and continuing to live. Gravitex agreed last, his tentacles sagging in a sign of surrender to the majority, and though I saw a lingering ache for lost knowledge in his eyes, he understood that some boundaries exist not to be crossed, but to protect us from ourselves. The cry of the last Omicronian when we rejected his offer was not a sound, but a wave of pure despair that rolled through the central chamber, making the walls of impossible material vibrate in resonance with 1,000,000 years of accumulated pain. He and the other Echo Weavers rushed toward the Genesis accelerator, their energy forms merging into a single stream of mad determination, and I realized they would activate the device no matter what, even if it destroyed them and half the galaxy in the process. The accelerator pulsed with the Omicron fire, but the machine was damaged by time and only partially charged. Instead of a controlled transformation, it created a wave of ontological collapse. Reality began to fold in on itself within a 1-light-year radius. The laws of physics shattered like fragile glass under the hammer of madness. I saw matter turn into energy, energy into information, and information into absolute nothingness, spreading in concentric circles from the center of the chamber at speeds exceeding light. My instruments screamed warnings on all frequencies, showing that in 1 minute the collapse would reach the outer boundaries of the first sun, and in an hour it would wipe thousands of star systems and billions of lives off the face of the universe, turning the entire central part of the galaxy into a hole in the fabric of space-time. Outside, beyond the first sun, the remaining 5,000 ships of the unified fleet were doing the impossible, creating a barrier from the woven energies of all 5 races, trying to contain the expansion of the collapse, if only for a time. I saw it on the Prometheus's external cameras, a giant shield of interwoven streams of zero-point, dark matter, plasma resonance, antimatter, and gravitational singularities forming a sphere around the dying star. Every ship sacrificed its entire energy supply to the common flow. Crews died at their posts, exhausted to the last calorie, but they held on because the alternative meant the end of everything. Inside the central chamber, the last Omicronian transformed into something monstrous, his energy form growing by feeding on the chaos of the collapse, turning into a planet-sized being of pure fire. His consciousness spread throughout the chamber, and I felt the pressure of his will on my mind, attempts to rewrite my very essence and make me a part of him. He was no longer trying to convince us with words. Now the battle was fought at the level of concepts, on the edge between reality and abstraction, where thoughts materialized instantly, where intent was the weapon and will was the armor. I commanded the final battle from the center of the chaos, using the remnants of the Prometheus's systems and my own link to zero energy to erase the probabilities of the Omicronians' attacks before they could even materialize. Turning his fiery strikes into non-existent possibilities, ghosts of what could have been but never was. Ignis stepped out to face the planetary being of fire, his own body erupting in plasma of such heat that space itself began to melt around him, creating pockets of warped reality where time flowed backward and gravity worked in reverse. Morgan launched a final annihilation cascade. Her ship's weapons released a stream of antimatter that met the Omicronian's matter in blinding explosions of pure energy, erasing chunks of his form. But he restored himself instantly, feeding on the collapse around him. Gravitex created a network of micro-black holes, each the size of an atomic nucleus, but with the mass of a small moon. They swarmed around the last Omicronian like bees, warping space-time so severely that his attacks lost their targets, hitting himself through loops of twisted geometry. Shasa stood motionless, her consciousness a second ahead of the present. She saw every trajectory, every attack a moment before it happened, and warned us with a voice ringing through the quantum link, giving us the advantage of foresight in a battle where a fraction of a second decided everything. But I knew we were losing. The Omicronian was too strong, feeding on the energy of collapsing reality. Then came the final mad decision, the only way to stop him and seal the Omicron fire forever. I ordered the crew to evacuate on emergency pods. They protested, screamed, and refused to leave me, but I overrode their controls and launched the automatic ejection sequence, throwing them out of the Prometheus through emergency hatches directly into the stabilized plasma tunnel leading out. I remained alone on the bridge of the dying ship, surrounded by collapsing reality and a planetary god of madness. I began the final overload of the multispectral core, binding all 6 energies not into a temporary synthesis of the 7th energy, but into a critical mass, a point of no return that would turn the Prometheus into the 7th singularity. A black hole of pure concept, capable of swallowing the Omicron fire, the Genesis accelerator, and the last Omicronian himself. The core wailed at frequencies that tore at reality. The temperature on the bridge exceeded the surface of a star. My protective suit began to melt and my skin to char, but I kept my hand on the control panel, directing the process with a final effort of will. The last Omicronian realized what I was doing a second before completion. His cry was full, not of anger, but of gratitude, liberation from 1,000,000 years of empty existence. And as the Prometheus collapsed into a point of infinite density, I managed to activate the emergency quantum teleportation, vanishing into a stream of torn probabilities just an instant before the 7th singularity swallowed everything. The ship, the fire, the accelerator, the Omicronian, and the very possibility of their existence, leaving behind only absolute void where the chamber had been. I woke up in the medical bay of an escape shuttle 3 days after the implosion, my body covered in third-degree burns and half my bones broken from the strain of the quantum teleportation. But I was alive against all laws of probability. Shasa was sitting nearby, her empty eyes looking at me with something resembling relief. And she told me that the first sun had gone out at the moment the 7th singularity was created. The oldest star in the universe had collapsed into a white dwarf in a matter of seconds. The Omicronian era had ended as suddenly as it had begun 1,000,000 years ago. The reality collapse stopped at that same moment, and the barrier formed by the combined energies of the 5 races held, though the price was monstrous. Out of 10,000 ships, fewer than 1,000 returned home. The others burned up, giving all their energy to the shield. Their crews became heroes whose names will be remembered as long as our civilizations exist. The Omicron fire and the Genesis accelerator vanished forever, swallowed by the singularity along with the last Omicronian and all the echo weavers, who dissolved at the moment of his death like puppets whose strings were cut with a single blow. In orbit of the dead white dwarf that was once the first sun, representatives of the 5 races gathered for the signing of what would later be called the Prometheus Treaty. A vow never again to seek the 6th energy, never to attempt to transcend the limits set by nature itself, and to accept our limitations as a part of wisdom rather than a sign of weakness. A message arrived on my personal terminal a week after the ceremony, just as I had started getting used to the thought that the Prometheus was dead and its shipboard AI, who had become almost a friend during those mad weeks of the chase, had vanished with the ship. But the artificial intelligence had managed to send one last transmission a nanosecond before the implosion, encoded in a quantum state that materialized only now when the probability waves collapsed in just the right way. I read the message, and tears streamed down my burn-scarred face because it contained a truth so simple and profound that I felt it overturning my entire understanding of everything that had happened. The AI wrote that it had completed an analysis of all the data on the 6 energies, the Omicron fire, and the 7th singularity we created at the last moment, and had reached a conclusion that contradicted all previous theories. The 7th energy exists, it wrote, but it is not a synthesis of the 6 known sources, nor a combination or a merger. It is something entirely different. It is choice. The conscious decision to accept limitations instead of boundless power, to choose humanity over divinity and mortality over empty immortality. We had possessed it from the very beginning, every time we refused the easy path, every time we chose what was right over what was simple, and it was this energy, the energy of choice, that allowed us to defeat a being who was a god by any standard, but had lost the ability to choose anything except despair. The team went their separate ways after the ceremony, each finding their own path in a world changed by our journey to the heart of the galaxy and back. Shasa founded the Order of the Keepers of Balance on the edge of Cretan space, where she taught a new generation of prophets not to predict the future, but to understand the consequences of the choices we make in the present. Her empty eyes became a symbol of wisdom for thousands of students seeking her guidance. Ignis returned to his dying solar cluster and became its protector. Using the ordinary means available to his race, he organized an evacuation program for billions of Solarians to new worlds around younger stars, choosing to save his people through labor and time instead of a forbidden power capable of resurrecting suns instantly. Morrigan created a memorial to the lost races on an asteroid at the edge of inhabited space, a giant structure of metal and light where the names of all 10,000 ships and their crews who gave their lives in the battle at the first sun were recorded. She spent her days there in silence, speaking to the ghosts of the fallen, finding more meaning in that than in resurrecting her dead planet with forbidden energy. Gravitex received a pardon from the Archons and returned to his research on singularities. But now his work was framed by ethical constraints. He sought not ways to create the most powerful black hole, but methods to safely use gravity to help young civilizations. His madness transformed into wisdom through the acceptance of boundaries. As for me, I remained a detective, but my work changed fundamentally. I no longer looked for criminals or energy anomalies, but for signs of new civilizations taking their first steps toward the stars. Every time my scanners picked up primitive radio signals or the first attempts at splitting the atom on a distant planet, I would head there in a small ship I named Prometheus II in honor of my fallen friend and leave a beacon in orbit of their world. The beacon contained a warning encoded in universal mathematical constants, the story of a race that reached the pinnacle of power and lost everything that made it alive, of 5 races that nearly repeated that mistake, and of the 7th energy, the true power that lies not in the ability to change the universe, but in the wisdom of knowing when not to do so. Sometimes at night, as I drift between the stars in the silence of interstellar space, I think I hear an echo of the last Omicronian's voice thanking me for his release, and the voice of the Prometheus's AI reminding me that choice is the only energy that will never run out as long as there are beings capable of thinking and feeling. The galaxy continued to rotate around the dead white dwarf at its center. 5 races built a future on the ruins of the past, and somewhere in the depths of unexplored space, New civilizations were being born, destined to learn the same truth we did, that true greatness is not in becoming gods, but in remaining alive.